The worst sound in the world isn't a scream. It isn't a growl or the shriek of twisting metal in a car crash. The worst sound is the one that's so familiar, so intimately yours, that it has no business existing outside of your own body. It's the sound of your own quiet, predictable routine happening somewhere else in the house, without you. It's the sound of your life being lived by an echo. And for me, it all started with a simple, unshakable feeling of being overtired. My name is Alex, and just over a year ago, I made the move I'd been dreaming of since my first soul-crushing internship in downtown Seattle. I bought a house. Not just any house, but a peculiar mid-century relic tucked away on 3 acres of dense Washington forest, about 40 minutes east of the city. It was a trade-off, a longer commute for the handful of days a month I had to go into the office, in exchange for absolute peace. My job as a user interface designer was almost entirely remote, a career that demanded long, silent hours staring at a screen, tweaking pixels and agonizing over shades of blue. The silence of the woods was supposed to be my sanctuary. The house itself was the main selling point. Built in the late 60s by a semi-reclusive architect, it was a split-level design with a lot of exposed wood, sharp angles, and massive plate glass windows that made you feel like you were living in a terrarium. The main floor had the living room, kitchen, and a dining area. A short, open staircase with a heavy, dark-wood banister led up to the master bedroom and a guest room. Another staircase led down to a finished basement which I'd converted into my office. It was perfect. Cool, quiet, and isolated from the rest of the house, it allowed me to descend into my work for 10, sometimes 12 hours at a time, surfacing only for coffee or a late-night meal. My routine was my anchor. I'd wake up around 8 a.m., make coffee using a French press, a ritual of specific grinds, water temperatures, and steeping times. I'd take my mug, a heavy ceramic one with a chip on the rim, and head down to the office. I'd work until lunch, usually around 2 p.m., then again until my eyes burned, often past midnight. Before bed, I'd do a final circuit of the house. Check the deadbolt on the front door, a heavy, satisfying thunk. Check the sliding glass door in the dining room. Turn off all the lights, except for a small lamp I kept on in the living room. Then, up the stairs to bed. The third step from the top always creaked. It was a predictable, comforting map of my existence. For the first 2 months, it was bliss. The only sounds were the wind rustling through the towering Douglas firs, the distant cry of a hawk, and the gentle hum of my computer. I was productive, I was calm, I was finally living the quiet life I'd craved. But I was also working myself to the bone. A huge project had landed on my plate, a complete overhaul of a major client's mobile app, and the deadline was brutal. I started pulling all-nighters. My sleep schedule disintegrated. I was living on caffeine and protein bars, and my world shrank to the glowing rectangle on my desk. That's when I started feeling it, that deep, bone-weary exhaustion where the edges of reality start to feel a little soft. The first strange thing was so small I barely registered it. I had a habit of leaving my office door in the basement slightly ajar when I went upstairs for coffee. It was a psychological thing, I guess, a way to feel less like I was sealing myself in a tomb for the day. I went up to the kitchen, made my second pot of the afternoon, and when I came back down the stairs, the door was shut. Not slammed, just perfectly closed. The heavy oak door clicked neatly into its frame. My immediate thought wasn't fear, it was irritation. Did I close that? I couldn't remember doing it. I was on autopilot, a zombie shuffling between caffeine sources. Of course I could have closed it without thinking. I opened the door and went back to work, the incident forgotten within minutes. A few days later it happened again. This time I was certain I'd left it open. I had my headphones on and the cord had been snaked through the opening. When I came back, the door was closed, the headphone cord pinched neatly in the jamb. It was just wrong. There were no drafts in the basement. The house's heating and air system was modern, silent, and didn't create so much as a breeze. I stood there for a full minute just staring at the door. The exhaustion was like a thick fog in my head. My memory felt unreliable, a faulty hard drive with corrupted sectors. I shook my head, convinced I was just losing my mind from lack of sleep, and got back to work. The next incident involved sound. I was lying in bed around 3 a.m., unable to sleep, my mind still churning with code and color palettes. The house was dead silent. Then I heard it, a single, soft click from downstairs. It sounded like the thermostat in the main floor hallway, the old, analog kind, adjusting the temperature. But I kept the house at a steady 68 degrees at night. It shouldn't have clicked. I lay there listening, my ears straining against the oppressive quiet. A few minutes later, another click. It was so faint, so utterly normal that it was easy to dismiss. Old house, old wiring, but it planted a tiny seed of unease. The project deadline loomed and I pushed myself harder. I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, and my diet consisted of whatever I could eat with one hand while the other was on my mouse. The house continued its subtle little tricks. One morning I came downstairs to find a kitchen cabinet, the one where I keep the glasses, standing wide open. I always closed it. I was meticulous about things like that. I blamed my fatigue. Then I'd find a light on in the guest room, a room I hadn't entered in weeks. I'd walk into my office, and the pen I always left on the right side of my desk would be on the left. Each event was a tiny pinprick in my reality, small enough to be explained away individually. But together, they started to form a pattern, a quiet campaign of psychological warfare. I felt like I was being gaslit by my own home. I started doing little tests. I'd leave a book on the coffee table at a specific angle and take a picture of it with my phone before going to bed. In the morning, it would be squared perfectly with the edge of the table. The picture on my phone was the only proof I hadn't imagined it. The real turning point, the moment my unease curdled into genuine fear, happened on a Tuesday night. I was deep in my work, headphones on, music blaring to keep me awake. I'd been in the zone for hours. Around 1 a.m., I took my headphones off to rub my tired eyes, and in the sudden silence I heard it. A footstep. It was directly above me on the main floor. A soft, shuffling sound on the hardwood of the living room. My blood ran cold. I was completely, utterly alone. My nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile down the private gravel road. I froze, my hand hovering over my mouse, my ears straining. Silence. Minutes passed, nothing. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I told myself it was the house settling. It was an old house, after all. Wood contracts and expands, that's all it was. But then I heard another sound. The faint, distinctive squeak of the loose floorboard right in front of the hallway closet. I knew that squeak. I stepped on it a dozen times a day. It was a sound as familiar to me as my own name, and it had just happened upstairs in an empty house. I slowly pushed my chair back, the casters making a low groan on the concrete floor. I crept up the basement stairs, my every sense on high alert. The main floor was dark, save for the single lamp I always left on. The air was still. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening. The silence was absolute. I walked the length of the house, my bare feet cold on the wood. I checked the front door. The deadbolt was thrown. I checked the sliding glass door. The security bar was in place. Every window was locked. There was no one here. There was no way anyone could be here. I went back to my office, but the focus was gone. I sat in the dark, just listening. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was wired with a sharp, terrifying adrenaline. I kept replaying the sounds in my head. The shuffle, the squeak. They weren't random creaks from a settling house. They were specific. They were deliberate. Over the next week, the sounds became more frequent and more specific. It was no longer just footsteps. One night, I heard the faint sound of my ceramic coffee mug being placed on the granite kitchen countertop. It was a unique sound, a low, dull clink that I knew intimately. I was in the basement. My mug was on my desk, right next to me. I started to feel like I was under surveillance. The house wasn't just making noises, it was mimicking my noises. It was replaying my routine. I began to actively test the theory. One evening, on my way to the kitchen, I intentionally scuffed my foot 3 times on the rug in the entryway. I made my coffee, went back down to my office, and I waited. For 2 hours, there was nothing. My shoulders began to unclench. I felt foolish, paranoid. Then I heard it. From the floor above me, faint but unmistakable, scuff, scuff, scuff. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. My mind was breaking. The stress, the lack of sleep, it had to be auditory hallucinations. That was the only rational explanation. I called my doctor. I was vague, ashamed. I told her I was under a lot of stress, not sleeping, and was feeling anxious, maybe hearing things. She was sympathetic, prescribed a mild sedative to help me sleep, and recommended I take some time off work. I took the prescription, but I couldn't take the time off. The deadline was a week away. The sedatives didn't help. They just dragged me into a thick, dreamless stupor for a few hours, from which I'd wake feeling groggy and even more on edge. The house seemed to know when I was most vulnerable. The sounds would start just as the medication was wearing off in the murky pre-dawn hours. The jingle of my keys, though they were on the hook by the door. The sound of the fridge door opening and closing, the soft suction whump of the seal. The creak of my office chair when I was lying in bed upstairs. The house was learning. It was building a library of my habits, my sounds, the acoustic signature of my life, and it was playing them back for me, an audience of one. My work began to suffer. I couldn't concentrate. I'd sit at my desk, trying to focus on lines of code, but my ears were always tuned to the floor above, waiting. The silence became as terrifying as the sounds. It was a loaded silence, full of potential. Every quiet moment was just the space between the last sound and the next. My paranoia grew into a living, breathing thing. I bought a cheap digital audio recorder and started leaving it in different rooms. I'd record for hours, then spend even more hours listening back, hunched over my computer with headphones on, fast-forwarding through long stretches of silence to find them. The tiny, perfect, inexplicable sounds of me. The recordings were my damnation. Hearing them in the clear, objective light of day, stripped of the context of darkness and exhaustion, was somehow worse. There it was, the sound of my throat clearing, recorded in the living room while I was in the shower. The sound of my distinct, heavy cyan mutter I did when a piece of code wouldn't compile, recorded in the kitchen an hour after I'd done it in my office. I was living in a cage with a ghost that wore my face, or at least my sounds. I lost weight. My skin was pale and there were dark, bruised-looking circles under my eyes. I stopped answering calls from friends. What could I say? My house is pretending to be me. They'd think I'd had a complete breakdown, and maybe I had. The line between what was real and what my sleep-deprived brain was manufacturing had blurred into non-existence. I was living on an island and the water was rising. The project was finally finished. I submitted the final files at 4:17 a.m. on a Friday, my hands shaking as I hit send. An immense wave of relief washed over me, immediately followed by a crushing wave of fatigue. I hadn't truly slept in what felt like weeks. I turned off my computer, went upstairs, and collapsed into bed. For the first time in a long time, I slept deeply. I woke up late Saturday afternoon. The house was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window. For a moment, everything felt normal. The fear and paranoia of the past few weeks felt like a bad dream, a fever that had finally broken. I convinced myself it had all been a product of stress. The human mind is a fragile thing, I reasoned. I had pushed mine to its limit and it had simply buckled. Now that the pressure was off, I could heal. I could get back to normal. That day was peaceful. I made a proper meal. I sat on the deck and listened to the birds. I didn't hear a single strange sound. I felt a profound sense of calm. The house was just a house again. That night I took one of the sedatives, not because I was scared, but because I wanted to guarantee another night of deep, restorative sleep. I was wrong. The peace was just an intermission. The climax didn't come with a bang. It came with a whisper. It was about a week after the project had ended. A storm was rolling in from the coast, one of those big, dramatic Pacific Northwest affairs. The sky had been a bruised purple all afternoon. The wind was picking up, making the tall firs sway and groan. The forecast called for power outages. I'd stocked up on candles and made sure my flashlights had fresh batteries. There was something primal and unsettling about the approaching storm. The world outside was about to be plunged into chaos, and I felt a familiar, cold dread creeping back in. As darkness fell, the first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the huge living room windows. The wind howled, a low, mournful sound. I decided to just stay on the main floor. I didn't want to be in the basement office, and I didn't want to be upstairs in bed. I sat on the couch in the living room, a book open on my lap, though I wasn't reading. I was just listening to the storm. Around 10 p.m., the lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the house into absolute blackness. The sudden absence of the low hum of the refrigerator and other electronics was jarring. Now the only sounds were the wind and the rain, a constant, roaring assault on the house. I lit a few candles, their small flames dancing and casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The house felt bigger in the dark, the corners receding into impenetrable gloom. I sat there for what must have been 2 hours, just watching the candlelight flicker. The storm was a comforting blanket of noise. It drowned out the possibility of any smaller, more subtle sounds. I felt strangely safe within its fury. My fear began to ebb, replaced by a kind of weary resignation. I was just about to give in to sleep, right there on the couch, when the wind died down for a moment. In the brief, sudden lull, I heard it. It came from the kitchen, a soft click. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't the storm. It was a small, mechanical, and entirely familiar sound. I sat bolt upright, my heart instantly pounding, my ears strained in the near silence. There it was again. The soft, rhythmic tick-tick-tick of the gas stove's igniter. Someone was trying to light the stove. But the power was out. The igniter wouldn't work. The sound was just happening, a phantom sound in a dead kitchen. I held my breath, listening. The ticking stopped. It was replaced by a new sound, the sound of the refrigerator door swinging open. I knew that sound. It wasn't the motor, which was silent, but the specific, low groan of the hinge, followed by the soft, sucking sound of the magnetic seal releasing. Sounds that shouldn't be possible without a person there to make them. My blood turned to ice. I was frozen on the couch, a prisoner in my own home. My flashlight was on the coffee table, just out of reach. I didn't dare move. Then came the footsteps. They were my footsteps, not just the sound of feet on the floor, but my specific gait, the slight drag of my right foot when I'm tired, the weight and cadence of my walk. The sound moved from the kitchen area across the dining room floor. It paused. I heard the faint jingle of my keys. My actual keys were on a hook by the front door, 10 feet from me. Then I heard the sound that broke me. The sound of the deadbolt on the front door being turned. A loud, deliberate metallic thunk. I could see the door from where I sat. The knob wasn't turning. The bolt wasn't moving. It was just the sound. A perfect, high-fidelity reproduction of the sound layered over a silent reality. The house wasn't moving things. It was playing them back. It was performing for me. The footsteps started again, moving from the front door towards the central staircase. I heard the first step onto the wooden stairs, creak. It was the sound of my own weight settling on the wood. Then the second step. Then the third, the one that always groaned in protest. Kriyak. It was perfect. A perfect mimicry. The footsteps ascended the staircase, one by one, a slow, methodical climb into the darkness of the upper floor. My own bedroom was up there. The footsteps reached the landing. I heard the sound of my bedroom door, which always stuck a little, being pushed open with a soft shuff against the carpet. And then silence. A profound, heavy, terrifying silence that was worse than any noise. The storm outside had become a distant murmur. The world had shrunk to this house, to the dark living room where I sat, and the unseen presence in my bedroom directly above me. It was in my room. It was waiting. What was it waiting for? I sat there for an eternity. Maybe it was 10 minutes, maybe it was an hour. Time had ceased to have meaning. My entire being was focused on the ceiling above me, on the space where my bed, my clothes, my life resided. Then the final sound began. It was soft, so soft I thought at first it was the wind, but it was rhythmic, it was biological, it was the sound of breathing, a slow, deep inhale and a long, quiet exhale. It was coming from the top of the stairs, from the dark, yawning maw of the hallway. And it was my breath. I knew its rhythm. I knew the slight wheeze on the exhale when I was anxious. It was the sound of me trying to stay calm. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror, unlike anything I have ever experienced, washed through me. This was not a memory being replayed. This was happening in real time. The house was listening. My mind, screaming and fractured, latched onto a single desperate idea, a test, an awful, terrible test. With every ounce of willpower I possessed, I held my breath. My lungs burned. My chest ached. But I stayed silent, my mouth clamped shut. And the breathing from the top of the stairs stopped. The silence that followed was the most horrifying thing I have ever known. We were locked in a standoff, me and my echo. After what felt like a lifetime, I couldn't hold it any longer. I gasped, a ragged, desperate intake of air. And a half-second later, from the darkness above, I heard it. The exact same ragged, desperate gasp played back to me. I broke, a switch flipped in my brain. I didn't scream, I didn't run. All the fear, the paranoia, the exhaustion, it all collapsed inward into a single, dense point of absolute certainty. I was not alone. And the thing that was with me was not a ghost, not a person, but the house itself. An architectural predator that had learned to perfectly imitate its prey. And I was its prey. I sat on that couch, motionless, until the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the windows. The storm had passed. The house was silent. The entity, whatever it was, had retreated with the darkness. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I just watched the world outside slowly return to color. When the sun was fully up, I stood up on stiff, trembling legs. I didn't look upstairs. I didn't go to the kitchen. I walked to the front door, unlocked the still-locked deadbolt, and stepped outside into the damp, clean air of the morning after a storm. I didn't close the door behind me. I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. I didn't look back. I drove down the gravel road, leaving behind my computer, my clothes, my books, the entire physical record of my life. I left it all for the house to archive. I drove for 2 hours, straight back to Seattle, and checked into a cheap motel by the airport. The first thing I noticed was the noise. The constant roar of jets overhead, the rumble of traffic on the interstate, the shouting from the room next door. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. That was 6 months ago. I live in a small, characterless apartment in a downtown high-rise now. I never let it get quiet. The television is always on, even when I sleep. I keep a fan running for white noise. I've sold the house. I did it all through a realtor over the phone. I told him to throw everything out. I took a massive loss, but I didn't care. I just wanted my name off the deed. He asked if there was anything wrong with the property that he needed to disclose. I just said, no, it's a very quiet house. I have a new job at a bustling, open-plan office. I see a therapist twice a week. She's diagnosed me with severe PTSD and a lingering psychosis brought on by extreme stress and sleep deprivation. It's a neat clinical box to put the experience in. It's a story that makes sense. My friends and family all accept it. Alex had a breakdown from overwork. He's better now. But I know what I heard. I know the difference between a hallucination and a perfect echo. I am haunted not by a spirit but by sound, by patterns, by the imprint we leave on the spaces we inhabit. I can't stand repetition. A neighbor leaving for work at the same time every day, their keys jingling in the hall, sends a spike of cold dread through me. The hum of my new refrigerator sometimes sounds, for a split second, like the one from the house. Sometimes, late at night, when the city outside has finally quieted to a low, distant hum, I'll hear it. A faint sound from the other room. The soft click of a thermostat I don't have. The squeak of a floorboard that doesn't exist. I tell myself it's my memory. It's trauma. The therapist gives me techniques to ground myself, to separate the past from the present. But the fear never really goes away. It lives in the silence between heartbeats, the unanswered question that keeps me awake night after night. Was the house a unique, malevolent entity, or was it just an amplifier for my own frayed psyche? And the most terrifying question of all, the one that whispers to me from the quiet corners of my new apartment. When you pour so much of your life into a place, so much routine and repetition and sound, what happens when it learns to pour it back? And did all of it stay there? Or did a little piece of the echo follow me out the door?